There were few movies this year where my hopes for what it could and should be were higher than for Ridley Scott's Napoleon. The historical epic as a genre has mostly dwindled into the background of Hollywood's focus in the last decade, giving way to the ultra-dominance of Marvel superheroes and other big franchises. But although it has dwindled as a genre, it is not dead yet, and in my opinion it is time for a revival. It is time for the historical epic to regain its position as the best that Hollywood has to offer.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
But unfortunately, despite my anticipation, Napoleon is not the movie to do this. Now, genre dominance in Hollywood always comes and goes in cycles. There have been multiple times in the history of Hollywood where the historical epic dominated the box office. Most noticeably in the late 1950s and early 60s with movies like Julius Caesar, Lawrence of Arabia and Ben-Hur. And secondly, in the early 2000s, there was a huge wave in commercially highly successful historical epics with Gladiator, Master and Commander, Troy, Kingdom of Heaven, King Arthur and Alexander. Of course, less so historical, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy can also be added to this list. Not only have I always loved history, but this wave of historical epics was also part of my formative movie-going years during my early teens, and they hold a special place in my heart. But of course, all good things must come to an end, and as it so often goes in Hollywood, when something works, they have to make as much of it as possible, as fast as possible, and as cheap as possible. So quality goes down, audience fatigue sets in, and the genre starts to lose relevance, while Hollywood searches for the next big thing.
I am Iron Man.
This is of course not to say that the genre has died completely. In the past years it has flourished on the small screen with TV shows such as Vikings and Game of Thrones. And there are still films being made for the big screen. However, they are just not quite cutting through the noise and drawing the viewership they need to be profitable. Because it is well known that historical epics are very expensive to make. Movies like The King, Ridley Scott's The Last Duel and Robert Eggers' The Northman were all very good movies, but they weren't brilliant. They weren't the game changers that the genre truly needs to break through to the forefront of the movie theater experience again. Both The Last Duel and The Northman also struggled at the box office to recoup their budgets, which is of course not great for the studios' confidence in the genre. But when the trailers for Napoleon dropped, I thought, this is the one. An epic on one of the most famous historical emperors of all time, about a truly complex and morally grey character, yet an undeniably brilliant military commander. Although was he not also always creating propaganda around his own achievements? So was he really as brilliant, or was he just a savvy self-promoter? Was Napoleon a ruthless dictator or a fantastic revolutionary reformer? I truly hoped that this movie could explore all of those questions and that it could be something very special. The perfect combination of epic, beautifully shot battle sequences, but also a deep historical study of both the geopolitical developments of the time and the complex man that was Napoleon. Now, this is a lot to ask from a movie, so maybe my disappointment was inevitable. Yet, when I came out of the movie theater, I strongly felt that Napoleon deserved better, that it could and should have been something much more special. Now, first things first, on a technical level, Napoleon was a good movie. It might be even one of Ridley Scott's best. The set design is detailed, the cinematography is great, and when it comes to shooting the big historical battles, it was maybe not historically accurate, but it was epic. The film does truly transport you into Napoleonic France, except there is no depth to it. As the viewer, you do not feel like you are immersed in this world. You only feel like you are seeing the surface level vignettes of moments of Napoleon's life. Now, the sad thing about the Napoleon movie is that it is extremely clear what its makers were trying to do, and it's also extremely clear where it all went wrong.
So all these historians that have piled on you saying, you know, Marie Antoinette's hair wasn't that long,
I'm not going to walk into that death trap. Are you kidding me?
So, sorry, beep.
First of all, of course it is a struggle to compress 30 years of the life of one of the most complicated and fascinating figures in history into 2 hours and 40 minutes. Therefore, Napoleon should at least have been a trilogy. Hell, it should have been an 8-season high-quality television series like a combo of Game of Thrones, The Crown and Rome. But the film not living up to its potential is not just because it didn't have enough screen time. Now, a lot has already been said about the 4 hours director's cut that will come out on Apple TV in a couple months, and although there's certainly the possibility that the additional scenes will improve the movie, I strongly believe that it will not magically turn the film into the masterpiece that it could and should have been, because even though 2 hours and 40 minutes is not enough to fully explore this history, the film is not efficient at all in utilizing the runtime that it actually does have. I would argue the film just spends too much time on the relationship between Josephine and Napoleon. Now, I understand that creative choice. It is logical to approach a biopic like this with two goals. To, on the one hand, show the epic historical moments and the battles, and on the other hand, to show the intimate, behind-the-scenes personal life of the person that the public did never see, just as for an example, The Crown does. However, in Napoleon, these two dimensions of the story are completely disconnected from each other. In every scene, you see a completely different personality that is separate from the personality of the same character in the next scene. Instead of crafting Napoleon as a fully formed three-dimensional person with strengths, weaknesses, virtues and flaws, it just highlights one supposed personality trait each scene and completely forgets about it the next. There is no cohesive narrative. Instead, the viewer is kind of dropped in and out of various moments in Napoleon's life without much context, and that is a shame, especially for people who went to this movie to learn more about this history. The performances are not bad, and especially Vanessa Kirby is great. When it comes to Phoenix's performance, however, it is not so much that it is a bad performance or that it is bad acting. I would not dare to call Joaquin Phoenix a bad actor. However, I do think that in this film he made the wrong creative decisions around how to portray Napoleon, and honestly, I think he would agree with me. He was clearly aware that he was struggling with getting a grip on the character because he told Ridley Scott 2 weeks before the start of filming that he did not know what to do. Which is clear because throughout the movie how he portrays Napoleon is all over the place. It is also a very subdued, subtle performance where there's not a lot of dialogue and Phoenix is trying to convey things with subtle stares and looks and motions. But this is not what this movie needed. If the film was way more dialogue heavy, it would have so much more room to explore pretty much everything. The politics of the time, the French Revolution and how other European powers reacted to it. Napoleon's military brilliance, the societal reforms he implemented throughout Europe. So much could have been explored, and in Oppenheimer, for example, there is an immense amount of dialogue, but almost every single sentence is used to add historical context and or to create depth in the personality of Oppenheimer. And this is the thing, many are comparing Napoleon to Oppenheimer, I do as well, and in my opinion rightfully so, because I absolutely loved Oppenheimer. In fact, so much so that if people would ask me what I think the best film ever made is, right now Oppenheimer would be very high on that list. It is a masterpiece that in some ways has redefined what a historical biopic can be. I mean, the film is 3 hours of dialogue, one flash, one boom, and it has more adrenaline pumping through my veins than most action movies, while also being incredibly dense with fascinating history. And it just makes you think, if the right filmmaker can do that with Oppenheimer, what could have been done with Napoleon? Look, as many have pointed out, Hollywood is not in a great place right now. Marvel is dead in the water, Disney is losing billions, franchises are failing before they are even established, so I say it is time to bring back the historical epics in trilogy format, but in an evolved way. The early seasons of Game of Thrones have proven that this genre does not necessarily have to rely on big battle action sequences, although it is of course awesome to have them. But people love watching different powerful families and morally complex characters playing the games of power while sipping wine in a dark room just as much, if not more. And I truly think that Nolan has shown that he has an incredible talent for the historical biopic with Oppenheimer. As my colleague Thomas Flight has pointed out, Nolan is someone who relies heavily on exposition in dialogue to give context to his own complex narrative structures and visual filmmaking, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. But I think that this approach is perfectly suited for the historical epic biopic, where the exposition dialogue can give us more interesting insight into the history, while the visual spectacle that Nolan is also a master at is used for the battles. So here's what we do. We tell Nolan that even though he really would like to do the next James Bond, it's just not gonna happen. Napoleon was not what it could have been, and we have to let that rest for now. Maybe we can try again with him in 15 years. But we do still have Caesar, so we commit Nolan to a trilogy about Julius Caesar. Each movie is 3 hours. The first one covers his rise to power, the second one his reign, and the final one, of course, his fall. We don't let Caesar fire cannons at the pyramids. Instead, we put a team of historians next to Nolan to help him with the script, just as the writers of American Prometheus helped him with Oppenheimer. Casting wise, I'm not completely sure yet, although I did see some fan casting suggestions with Michael Fassbender, which could be interesting. Of course, we also need a great Pompey and Marcus Licinius Crassus for the period of the First Triumvirate. And this will give us plenty of historical battles, but also plenty of Game of Thrones style political maneuvering between these 3 powerful men and the Senate. For the soundtrack, I say, we get the composers of the soundtrack for the French film Athena, which I think is a brilliant soundtrack, one of the best I've heard in years, and certainly on the level of Oppenheimer's soundtrack, which is a huge compliment. I say we let Nolan cook on these 3 films for the next 8 to 10 years. It will be the apex of his career. He will give us 3 masterpieces and bring back the historical epic to its former glory. He will save Hollywood, we build a statue in his name, and then he can enjoy the rest of his life and do whichever he wants.
You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
So that is my pitch for how to save cinema. Now let me know what you think in the comments below. Also check out my new channel, The Financial Corgi. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.